Have you ever stopped to think that a Roman emperor, who ruled millions of people, faced wars, plagues, and political betrayals, still found time to write in a diary every morning? Meanwhile, many people, with a cell phone in their pocket and all the technology in the world, feel they don't even have time to breathe properly. The truth is, the problem has never been time. The problem is that nobody taught you three things that Japanese samurai and the most hardened philosophers in history have known for centuries. And after this video, you'll never look at your day the same way again. A study by Dr. Gloria Mark of the University of California showed that on average, it takes a person 23 minutes and 15 seconds to regain focus after a single interruption. 23 minutes for a notification, for a quick glance at your phone, for a thought that invaded your mind about something you don't even control. Now multiply that. How many times a day are you interrupted? Most people lose between 3 and 5 hours a day just reacting to things they didn't plan for. And then you get to the end of the day with that feeling, I did so much, but I didn't accomplish anything. Ever felt that way? Well, that's a symptom of a deeper problem than just poor organization. It's a problem of philosophy, of how you perceive time. The ancient Greeks had two words for time: chronos, which is clock time, what passes second by second, and kairos, which is the time of opportunity, the right moment. The problem with the modern world is that we live obsessed with chronos, trying to squeeze more tasks into fewer hours, and completely blind to kairos, which is the art of being fully present in the moment that matters. And do you know who mastered this art? The samurai, the Stoics, men who lived in contexts infinitely more chaotic than ours, and yet they had a clarity about time that we have completely lost. Today I'm going to show you 3 principles that these traditions have taught us. 3 reasons why you never have enough time, and more importantly, how to solve each of them. Chapter 1. The Broken Filter. In today's video, I'm going to tell you the story of a young man named Lucas. Lucas was 25 years old, lived in Chicago, and worked as a freelance video editor. Lucas had a few clients, paid the bills, and woke up early. But Lucas lived in a state of silent exhaustion, that kind of tiredness that comes from the mind. Every day was the same. He would wake up, grab his phone before even getting out of bed. He would check the views on the last project he posted to his portfolio, likes on his Instagram post, responses from clients he had sent proposals to, and depending on what he saw there, his entire day would be affected. If the numbers were good, he would be euphoric for 20 minutes and then anxious to maintain that. If the numbers were bad, a gray cloud covered everything. Motivation vanished. He would sit down to work, but he would just sit there, staring at the screen, the cursor blinking in the void while his mind churned, am I not good enough? Did that client not respond because they thought it was too expensive? Should I have done things differently? 2 hours passed. Lucas hadn't edited a single video frame, but I felt like I'd run a marathon. The exhaustion was real. Productivity, 0. What Lucas didn't know was that he was violating a principle that a Greek slave discovered almost 2,000 years ago. That slave's name was Epictetus, and the lesson is so simple it hurts. Epictetus was born a slave, that's right. The guy didn't choose where he was born. He didn't choose to be the property of another man. He had no right over his own body. And it was precisely this extreme condition that made him see something that most free people never perceive. In the first paragraph of the Enchiridion, his manual, Epictetus writes the most surgical phrase in Western philosophy. There are things that depend on us and things that do not depend on us. Period. Simple as that. These things depend on us. Our opinions, our desires, our actions, our effort. What does not depend on us, what others think, the final result, the past, the weather, the algorithm, the customer's response. When Epictetus looks at human suffering, he says that almost all suffering comes from confusing these two categories, from investing emotional energy in that which is not within our control as if it were. Now think about Lucas. He would spend 2 hours ruminating about views he didn't control, about a client's response that didn't depend on him, about the opinions of people he didn't even know, and he called that work. He called that worrying about his career. But in practice, it was the emotional equivalent of shouting at the wind to change direction. And it wasn't just Lucas. This is a silent epidemic. How many people do you know who spend hours in traffic cursing the traffic as if cursing would solve anything. How many scroll through social media comparing their own lives to the edited lives of strangers? How many lose sleep thinking about what was said in that work meeting 3 weeks ago? All of this is time invested in things that are beyond our control, and the cost is brutal, because every minute spent there is a minute stolen from what we can truly change. Ethan Kross, a psychology professor at the University of Michigan who specializes in internal dialogue, has demonstrated through research that rumination, the habit of mentally dwelling on things that have already happened or that we cannot control, not only wastes time but actively degrades the ability to make decisions. The brain has a limited resource called executive function, which is basically its ability to focus, prioritize, and act. And rumination consumes this resource like a program running in the background of a computer. Lucas was doing exactly that. His mind's computer had 30 tabs open, all consuming energy, and none of them were the tab for his actual work. Epictetus's solution is surgical. Before dedicating even a second to anything, run it through the filter. Does this depend on me? If yes, it deserves all your energy. If not, let it go. With clarity. With the intelligence of someone who knows that attention is the scarcest resource that exists, and that wasting it on what you don't control is the most sophisticated form of self-sabotage. Chapter 2. The Missing Shield. Lucas began applying Epictetus's filter, and it worked. In the first few weeks, he stopped compulsively checking numbers. He left his cell phone outside his room in the morning. When a thought about something he couldn't control arose, he acknowledged, "This doesn't depend on me," and he returned to what he could control. The result was impressive. In 2 weeks, he was delivering projects faster, with higher quality, and with less of that invisible exhaustion. It seemed like the day had gotten longer. It hadn't. He had just stopped wasting hours on ghosts. But then came the 4th week. One Tuesday, he sat down to work on an important project. Tight deadline. He was focused, on track. And then he received an email from a former client complaining about work he had delivered 2 months earlier. The tone was aggressive, accusatory, unfair. Lucas froze. Anger surged. His focus evaporated instantly. He spent the next 2 hours drafting and deleting an angry response, ruminating on how absurd it all was, mentally reliving every detail of that project to prove to himself that he hadn't made a mistake. When he finally returned to work, it was too late. The deadline was missed, and the spiral began again. Frustration at having lost time, anxiety about the delay, guilt for not having reacted better. What happened? Lucas had the filter, but he didn't have the shield. And this is where Marcus Aurelius comes in, the Roman emperor who ruled during one of the most chaotic periods in history. Wars on the borders, a plague that killed millions, internal conspiracies, betrayals by those closest to him. The guy lived under a level of pressure that would make any modern CEO look like an intern. And do you know what Marcus Aurelius did every morning? He would sit down and write down what could go wrong that day. This isn't being pessimistic, it's being strategic. In the Stoic tradition, he called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. In the Meditations, which is his personal diary that was never intended for publication, he writes things like, "At dawn say to yourself, today I will meet intrusive, ungrateful, arrogant, treacherous, envious, and antisocial people. All these things happen to them because of their ignorance of what is good and what is evil." Do you see what he's doing? He's not complaining. He's preparing. He's vaccinating his mind before the virus arrives. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman, a professor at Stanford, explains the mechanism behind this very clearly. When something unexpected and negative happens, this is what neuroscientists call amygdala hijacking. Your nervous system goes into fight or flight mode. The prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for rational thought, temporarily loses control, and you're left there, reacting emotionally instead of acting strategically. But what happens when you've already anticipated the problem? The impact is drastically less. The brain already has a model for it. It has already created a response. The surprise which fuels the emotional reaction simply doesn't happen. That was exactly what Lucas needed. He learned to filter out what he couldn't control but he hadn't learned to prepare for the inevitable emotional impact of what he couldn't foresee. After Lucas discovered premeditatio malorum, his morning ritual changed. Before turning on his computer, he would take a notebook and write down 3 things. What is the most important task of the day? What could distract him? And how he would react when that happened. It was simple. It took 5 minutes, but the effect was transformative. When that annoying email arrived, instead of being caught off guard, he thought, I knew something like this could happen. The plan is, I'll reply after 5 in the afternoon with a clear head. Now I'll get back to what matters. And he would. No drama. No wasted 2 hours. Marcus Aurelius didn't have a coach. He didn't have a productivity app. He didn't have the Pomodoro technique. He had a 5-minute practice that protected the other 23 hours and 55 minutes of the day. That's true efficiency. Here it's worth pausing to bring up a point that connects all of this. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman has spent decades studying how the human brain makes decisions. And one of his most important discoveries is what he calls loss aversion. The pain of losing something is psychologically twice as intense as the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. This explains why we react so disproportionately to unexpected problems. The brain treats negative surprise as an existential threat, even when it's just a rude email. And that's precisely why premeditatio works. This technique doesn't eliminate the problem, but it eliminates the surprise, and without the surprise, the brain can process the situation rationally with the prefrontal cortex instead of emotionally with the amygdala. Researcher Gabriele Oettingen from New York University developed a technique called WOOP, which is basically a modern and scientifically validated version of premeditatio malorum: wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. The structure is practically identical to what Marcus Aurelius did in the 2nd century AD. The difference is that now we have magnetic resonance imaging to prove that it works. Chapter 3. The Missing Knot. Months passed. Lucas now had 2 solid habits. In the morning, he filtered everything through Epictetus's lens. Does this depend on me? Then, he dedicated 5 minutes to Marcus Aurelius's premeditatio. What could go wrong and how will I react? And the result was visible. Less anxiety, more focus, more clarity. But one thing still gnawed at him from the inside. Lucas had 6 projects open at the same time, 3 videos being edited, an online course he started creating, a personal YouTube channel that never got past the planning stage, and a partnership proposal that was only half finished. He worked a little on each one, made tiny advances on all of them, and finished none. And the worst part, at the end of each day, even after working 10, 12 hours, the feeling was one of stagnation, of going in circles, as if he were running on a treadmill, sweating, expending energy, but not getting anywhere. It was then that a Japanese friend, a designer he met on a collaborative project, said something that changed everything. Lucas, do you know musubi? Lucas didn't know. In Japanese tradition, musubi is the principle of tying, closing, and completing a cycle. The word appears in Shinto culture in the sacred knots that decorate temples. Each knot is a musubi, a closure that connects beginning and end, transforming something open into something complete. The friend explained, in Japanese culture, something that isn't finished is like a wound that hasn't healed. It remains open, consuming energy. The samurai didn't think about the next enemy while fighting the first. He dedicated everything to that combat. He finished, he breathed, and only then did he move on. And it has an even deeper dimension, the concept of zanshin, which is the awareness that remains after the action. When a Japanese archer releases the arrow, he doesn't lower the bow immediately. He maintains his posture, his attention, his presence for a few seconds after the shot. That is zanshin. It's the art of honoring closure before moving on. It's not just about finishing, it's about finishing with wholeness. That hit Lucas like a punch. He realized the problem wasn't a lack of time. It was an excess of open loops. Each unfinished project was a loose thread in his mind, drawing attention, generating guilt, consuming energy. Modern psychology calls this the Zeigarnik effect, discovered by Lithuanian psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik in the 1920s. She observed that waiters easily remembered orders that hadn't yet been delivered, but completely forgot those that had already been completed. The brain maintains a kind of active alarm for everything that remains incomplete. 6 open projects meant 6 alarms were ringing simultaneously in Lucas's head, none of them loud enough to be urgent, but all together creating a constant noise that made deep concentration impossible. Musubi's solution is radical in its simplicity. Choose one. Dedicate yourself entirely to it. Close the cycle. Tie the knot. And only then open the next one. Lucas made a list of 6 projects. He asked himself, if I could only finish one this month, which would have the biggest impact? The answer was clear. A client's video that was already 70% complete and, when delivered, would generate revenue and reputation. He put the other 5 on hold. He didn't abandon them. He put them on a list titled After the Knot, and he threw himself completely into that single project. In 4 days it was ready, and the feeling of completion, that profound relief of something that had been done from beginning to end, was something he hadn't felt in weeks. Then he moved on to the next one, and the next. In 3 weeks, Lucas had completed more projects than in the previous 2 months combined, because he eliminated the noise. And you know what's most interesting about all of this? These 3 principles, Epictetus's